Many people have questions about God and the Bible. With so many different views about God and how to interpret the Bible, many people wonder where they can turn to get biblical answers. Well, have no fear. Turn to my friend Andrew Rappaport and his friends on Apologetics Live. They can answer any question you have about God and the Bible. Check them out Thursday nights, 8 to 10 o'clock p.m. New York time at apologeticslive.com. You can watch or join the discussion at apologeticslive.com and challenge him with anything. Please ask him your really hard questions and tell him Ben sent you.
This is Apologetics Live. To answer your questions, your host from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport.
We are live, Apologetics Live, here to answer your most challenging questions. Anything you have about God and the Bible, as Ben said, we can answer it. And I figured Ben should open the show right there because it is the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of that documentary, What is a Woman? Yeah, and I heard Twitter decided I guess they said that playing that film on Twitter would be wrong, and then Elon said, no, wait, I own the company. We're going to play it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go. So, welcome, Drew. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very impressed that you were able to get Ben Shapiro to computerize his voice and do the opening of the show.
Yeah.
You know people.
It's either that or I just know AI.
Yeah.
I may or may not have been programming, artificial intelligence since, 90.
So can we blame you when the robots take over?
Yeah, I don't think so, because the code I wrote was for the federal government, and
yeah, they don't.
Wait, yeah, they would never do anything. They would never do anything wrong, not at all.
No,
so
you know what? But speaking of that, I listened to this thing. It was by a guy named David. I think his name's David Martin or something. But he was talking about COVID and how this has been in the works since the 1960s, and that the patent for the first what is it called, protein spike vaccine was patented by Pfizer in 1990, and he has all the documentation for it.
Yeah, and people have looked at the background with Fauci, and ever since the AIDS in the 80s, and he's been doing research, and that's so there's a lot of things we could look. If you start with a conclusion, you could find the things to line up, right? Mm-hmm. We always find that. Mm-hmm. So let's start with tonight's topic, and we'll get to it, but then we could do some things just so people know what do we get, because as you know, we get some people that get upset if we don't jump right to the topic. Right.
Yeah, we got to get to it.
Yeah, because otherwise, some
beating around the bush.
Yeah, we do an open Q&A. I mean, anyone can come in and ask anything. We could discuss anything. We get to our topics, but just because we don't answer what someone wants, first thing out of the gate. Okay, so we're going to talk about this. Actually, let me let you do this because this was your topic idea. Yeah. So why did you come up with this topic that we're going to talk about in a little bit?
Yeah, so the topic that I came up
on.
Well, that'll do it for tonight's show. Thank you for tuning in. But the topic for tonight is knowing when to walk away from the conversation. And we talk a lot on here about how to have conversation, how to listen to conversation, how to ask good questions. But I don't think we've ever talked about when the time is to walk away from a conversation. And this came about because of someone that you and I had been emailing pretty regularly.
Why you mention who?
Ben Zion.
And so anyone who's watched the last, three shows?
Yeah, about 3 episodes. You'll know who he is, but he wanted my email. He was talking to you and he wanted my email. And so I said, yeah, go ahead, give it to him. And
because for the record, and you know this, but maybe the audience doesn't, I never give out people's contact information without permission. So if you ask me for Drew's contact, I'm not giving it without permission. I never do that. Mm-hmm. So so that should tell you something. If anybody ever tells you that I gave them your contact information and I didn't call you first, or I didn't already know I had permission, it wasn't me.
Right. Right. But so I sent him an email that was a reply to what he had sent you. And then he emailed me back, and then I emailed him again, and it was just he didn't listen to what I had to say, even though in the email I clearly laid it out. I put text right in front of him, and he just didn't want to hear it. He wanted to continue to push his narrative. And basically, I told him, I said, look, I can't go any further with this because you're arguing in bad faith. And I told him he was arguing in bad faith because I put a passage before him and I laid out the context of that passage, and he tried to refute the context of that passage, even when I put it in the text. I just took the scripture and I put the scripture in the email, and he didn't want to see it. And so I said, okay, well, you're arguing in bad faith. I can't, I'm praying that the Lord will draw him to yourself. And I pray that you come to saving faith in Christ Jesus and repentance of your sin. But as far as this conversation, I can't go any further. And so after that, I thought about it and I said, well, let me reach out to Andrew and say, let's do a show about when to walk away from a conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I mean, look, and this was partially, you had asked me, you knew that I was in Queens, New York, which is where he was on Saturday. You asked if I was going to go over to his place. I was 15 minutes from the house he grew up in and the apartment he now lives in. Oops. He never gave me that. Yeah. So Ben, if you're watching, yeah, I know where you live. I know where you grow up. It only took me a couple seconds to figure that out, but I was 15 minutes away from him. And you were like, so you're going to go over there? And okay, well, I was with family.
Right.
But as I said to you, I just didn't think it was going to be profitable in any way. I could be wrong, but I didn't think it'd be profitable in any way because I just was afraid that, we'd end up in a situation where like we did heard on the show when he came in, he wasn't listening.
Right. Just
wants to, point fingers and things like that. And we'll deal with my email response to him too and things like that because I wanted to bring that up. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit tonight. We're going to do open Q&A, so we're going to get to your questions. Anyone who wants to come in, just go to apologeticslive.com. You can scroll down to see the duck icon. That is where to join us. I will encourage everyone, if everyone who's watching live now, please share it. Those who are listening later on podcast or watching later on whichever platform you're watching, please share it. We do appreciate that. It helps others to know about it. And really, the thing is, it helps people to know that they have a place they can get questions answered. Mm-hmm. I get questions during the week, and sometimes we bring them in here. I'm going to bring a couple in probably tonight, unless people who are here come in and ask questions. That's the best way to get your question answered, by the way, is to go to apologeticslive.com, join us when we're live. That is the best way. But another good way to get a question answered, if you're watching on YouTube while we're live, is to do a super chat. And if you do that, we'll respond to that because, well, you paid to get that question.
Right.
So or comment. So we'll read it. But yeah, I mean, we then, if we don't have questions, I go to those that have been emailed into me to answer. And that's where the whole thing with Ben was. It was an email and it was detailed. And I just knew that it was going to be very hard to give him a detailed written response because it's just, I'm better in this sort of media. He's not, he prefers writing. Is at least what he said, but I thought he explained himself well. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with his, but I thought he explained himself well. But so this is an interesting question. I'll say this to you, Drew, with the question, when do you walk away from a conversation? When I was younger, when I was, let's see, how old? I was like 24, 25 when I became a deacon in the church. And I remember being like the first year I was a deacon, first or second year. And we were in a leadership meeting and we got into a discussion that was this topic. because there was just someone who had been counseled over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the elders and I having this discussion, and it was like, when do you just say enough is enough? And I was like, never. I was like, you owe, as long as there's a chance, you keep trying. And I still remember he looks at me, it just goes, you're so young and
Oh, to be young again.
yes. And, you know, in a sense, I still remember the one time where I was counseling a couple, or a guy in a marriage. And I remember when I decided I need to walk away. This is, 2 years I've been working with this guy. He would call me weekly to daily. And I started to realize after a long period of time, I'm slow on the learning here. He just wasn't taking any advice that I was giving. And so I gave him a homework assignment, and I found this to be actually a profitable homework assignment. I've done it with others and it was helpful. He couldn't get along with his wife. Now, granted, I admit these two people should never have gotten married. They got married. They weren't saved. Not sure that she ever was. But when I asked them why they got married, and I'm not kidding, this was the response. He responded with, well, she used to be good looking, but now she's fat and ugly.
Wow.
Her response was, I wanted tall children.
Ooh.
And I'm just like, wow. Okay. So my homework assignment for him was, I want you to come up with 25 things that you like, or at least used to like, about your bride, about your wife. I said, and don't call me for help until you come up with a list of 25.
Mm.
And so he calls me up a week later. Can we talk? And I said, do you have that list? He's like, well, I got 3 things. 3. I said, it doesn't have to be what you like about her now. When you were dating her, come up with 25 things. Now, had he come up with 25, I was going to have him come up with another 25, another 25, and another 25 until he starts appreciating his wife. Right. Okay. Because I've done that with others and it worked well, but he wouldn't do it. And I just decided that was the time I said, you know what? If you can't come up with 25 things, then I don't see any reason in continuing until you do your homework. And so that was like toward the end of the week. Sunday, we go to church. And I think it was like that Monday, I got a call from a friend of mine. Hey, so-and-so wanted me to help counsel him. He called me up, he's talked to me at church and wants me to call this week. Any advice? And I said, yeah, tell him to write a list of 25 things he likes about his wife or you won't talk to him. And I realized what he immediately did was just say, well, if you don't give me what I want to hear, I'm just going to move on to someone else. Right. And really for him, it was just, he wanted to vent about his wife and feel okay about it. And I realized I was wasting my time with him. I could sooner talk to the wall and get a better response, because that's just what ends up happening. There's a point where you realize you're wasting time. Right. And so really, I think that's the question we're asking, right? How do we identify when we're wasting time?
Yes.
And that's really hard, because guess what? There's times I think where you don't know what the Lord's doing in someone's life.
Right.
I always tell this as an example. I still remember a friend of mine, he was at a gas station witnessing. Now, okay, let me explain to folks that don't live in the communist country of New Jersey. You're not allowed to pump your own gas. So you actually have a guy there at all hours of the night that has to pump your gas, because
wow, they still do that?
It's the only state in the union where nowhere in the state can you pump your own gas. Now, Oregon, you can, there are areas where you can pump your own gas, not in the major cities, but it's based on population. But yeah, New Jersey's the only one still. And so we used to go 11 o'clock at night to get gas, because there's no one in the gas stations but the gas attendants. So you had someone to evangelize.
Yeah. There you go.
That literally was what we used to do. And so he's out at a gas station. He's talking to this guy, sharing the gospel. And he's he sensed that this guy might have been getting convicted, but he wasn't sure, but the guy was getting angry. And literally the guy just pulls back with a fist and just swings it at my friend. And my friend just ducked down. And the guy did a 360, swung completely around, fell back against the pole, slid down, put both his hands into his face and started crying.
Mm.
And my friend had said, he said the last act before this guy got saved was an act of violence against the messenger. And if he just walked away when he thought this guy was getting angry,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't sure if it was conviction or anger, but had he walked away thinking it was anger, he wouldn't have seen that. Like,
Right.
well, and had he got knocked out unconscious, he might not have seen it either. But so we just don't know. We don't know what the Lord is doing.
Right. And that's important because we are called to evangelize. Right. And I tell, whenever I'm teaching anyone about apologetics, I tell them you're called to be three things. You're called to be a theologian. So you must know theology, because if you are to have a relationship with the Lord, you must know about the Lord. So you are to be a theologian. Second, you are to be an evangelist. The Great Commission is that we go out and we evangelize. We give the gospel to a lost and dying world. And the third, you are called to be an apologist. So you must know what you believe, why you believe it, and be able to communicate that to others. Now, in that is going to come discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's heated discussion, sometimes it's not. But we always want to be able to leave the door open if, say we're in a heated discussion and maybe we just need to step back a little bit. We want to make sure that we leave the door open for that person. If conviction hits, they can come back to us, right? They can run back because, you know, I saw a comment up here. I should have started, but I didn't. It was about Cage Stage Calvinists.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that. I think that was D, but I'll look for it.
I got it. There it is.
There we go. See,
It's hard.
it was D. There we go. See,
It's hard for those Cage Stage Calvinists, you know, because the Cage Stage Calvinists, they just love to argue. Well, the Cage Stage Calvinists, if you forget the grace portion of the doctrines of grace, whoever you're talking to, when that next person comes along to give the gospel, to water the seed, guess who they're not coming back to? They're not coming back to you because you just wanted to argue and bludgeon them over the head with your theological knowledge. So how we approach them, we want to be gracious, but we also, if we see where it's going in that direction, where we're just wasting time, we want to step back, but we also want to make sure we leave the door open so that if the Lord, like you said, if the Lord is doing something, we want to be able to be there for when they come back to us and be able to give them the answer, be able to pray with them, be able to cry with them if we need to cry with them. But sometimes it's not the same. It's not that. Sometimes we just need to say, okay, all you want to do is you just want to argue. You're not listening to anything that I have to say. You just want to argue to try to prove your point. This is not going anywhere. And so we just need to cut it here. But how we do that is important. We want to make sure that we're gracious when we do that. We don't want to respond in anger. We want to make sure we don't respond in frustration. We want to make sure that we're gracious and we are displaying the character of Christ when we back off from that conversation.
correct. And it is hard to tell. So let me tell a story. I think I've told this here before, but a friend of mine, Chad Williams, and I were out evangelizing at Huntington Beach. And he was, he's up on a box, and he did something that was for him, very different, just not what I was used to seeing. A guy came up, very arrogant, very just not seeming like he really cared to listen to what Chad was saying. Mm-hmm. And Chad just turned And I'm saying this is out of character for him. But he just turned to the guy and goes, "No gospel for you today. I was going to give you the gospel, but no gospel for you." And the guy walked away.
Wow.
And Chad gets done preaching. He gets down and we're packing up. And I'm like, I go, "Chad, what was up with that?" He goes, "I don't know." He goes, "I just felt like sharing the gospel with the guy, with as arrogant as he was being, it felt like I was throwing my pearls before swine." We're going to get to that passage in a bit. And just as he's telling me this, the same guy walks over to us. And he walks up to Chad and says, "Why won't you give me the gospel?"
Mm.
And Chad goes, "Now I will."
There you go.
And as we walked back to his parents' place, we're sitting there talking about it, and it was like Chad just goes, "Law to the proud, grace to the humble."
Yeah.
And that's really what ended up happening. I mean, he said, because the guy's total demeanor changed when he came back, and Chad felt, well, now you're ready to hear the gospel, and the two of them had a great conversation.
Mm.
Now, am I saying that you should always tell someone, no gospel for you? No, I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that the Lord spoke to Chad. I'm not trying to make that claim either, but it was just, Chad just had, for whatever reason, he felt it wouldn't be profitable to do. And he had the reaction he had. It was out of character for him, but God used that.
Yep.
So,
yeah. You know, while you were talking, I was thinking of a time where I had Mormons come to my house, and it was almost, they're the ones that ended the conversation. I was trying to keep them there, but so
okay, well, hold on. I'm gonna give you a little trick.
Okay.
That Dr. Silvestro taught me. When you get a Jehovah's Witness or Mormon or someone like that, where you know that once they figure out that you know what you're talking about and they want to bolt from the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
the first question he likes to ask them is, "How much time do you have?"
Well, they had already been there for about 2.5 hours.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because they'll usually say like an hour, and then after 10 minutes, they tell you they got to go because they have an appointment. And
Right.
ever since then, you just go, "Wait, I thought you said you have an hour. Did you lie to me? Or are you lying now?"
So they showed up, and I was at work, and my dad was living with us at the time. He said, "Well, come back around this time. My son will be here." And so they came back when I was there, and I brought them in the house, and we sat in the living room, and I let them go through their whole presentation, right? And then I just start talking to them, and we're talking.
Okay, let me stop you there.
Mhm.
Not to interrupt your story, but I do mean to interrupt your story for purpose. So why do that, right?
Mhm.
You're showing respect to them.
Yeah.
To let them explain everything they want to explain does two things. One, it shows respect.
Mhm.
So now you can appeal to them and say, "Hey, I let you speak uninterrupted." I did that with Ben when he was on. The other thing it does, it lets you listen to what they say they believe rather than just jumping in and going, "Well, this is what you believe," right? You
Right.
hear them out.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. That's exactly right. I want to show them that I'm listening to them. And so I let them talk, and then I start asking them questions. I start getting into the Bible, and we're going for about 2.5 hours. And for our listeners, Mormons always travel in twos. And typically you have one guy that's there that's on his second year of mission, and then another guy that's on his first year of mission, so that they rotate. So there's always an experienced guy and a guy that's being trained. And so the guy that was being trained, you could see he was starting to swell up with tears. And he looked at me and he said, "So what you're telling me right now is that if I die tonight, I will spend eternity in hell." And he said this through tears. And I looked at him and I said, "Yes. And I don't want that for you. I want you to come to know the saving grace of Lord Jesus Christ." And you could see it was weighing on him. And then the experienced guy got up and said, "Okay, we're done here." And they jetted out of the house. And I tried to track that guy down because they lived on my delivery route, and I tried to track him down to say, hey, if you need to, you come back to my house whenever and talk. But I couldn't find them.
Yeah.
They were never outside when they saw my FedEx truck, because I told them I work for FedEx and I've delivered to the house you live in.
And so they did what most people do when Jehovah's Witnesses come to their house. They saw your FedEx truck and they hid as if they're not home. Okay. So let me get some things that were coming up that we have here. John asked, what is a
Cage stage.
late
He meant
stage?
cage stage.
Yeah, cage stage Calvinist. Sorry, I'm learning. And so he then looked it up and he said, I looked it up. A cage stage Calvinist is someone who has learned tulip, the 5 points of Calvinism, and goes on a relational rampage. I don't know if that was what he meant, but really what it is, when you get someone who gets so excited about something, in this case Calvinism, and are just blasting everyone with it, that's the idea of cage stage. And that is more than just Calvinist, by the way. You have cage stage, continuationists, where they think they speak in tongues and they start, everyone's got to do it, and things like that. So you have those as well.
And you even, I sent this in a comment on Twitter to Owen Strand, because he was responding to someone and he said, why is it every post mill thinks that they have to always talk about post-millennialism? And I said, it's cage stage post-millennialism.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. All right. So Chris is asking this, and this is a 3-parter. So he says, why do you guys as a ministry accept ads from YouTube that are antithetical to the Christian message? Is it just money? We have no control over the ads that they put up. The only way we could do the super chats is to have the ads. So there is a way, I believe, to mark the ad to say that you don't like it. But yeah, I mean, if you expect Google or to be doing something that is going to be in line with the Christian message, no. They would never do it to, I'm sure, to a Muslim channel, but so yeah. All right. So it's not just about money. We didn't monetize for decades. I mean, we haven't, it wasn't that big of a deal, but the reality is that we are looking for ways to get support. And one way is by, watching the show. Mm-hmm. And so it's just one way that we can try to monetize, because it does, I know it's hard for people to conceive this, but ministry actually costs money. It's not just, I know everyone's, we used to get people to call them, or email the ministry and say that we should just live by faith. You try that at your job. Go into your boss's office and say, hey, I want to live by faith. You don't have to give me a paycheck. If you feel like it, good, I'm going to say that's God's blessing. And if you don't, I'm just going to live by faith.
There's only one person in history I know that did that, and that was George Mueller.
Actually,
story of George Mueller.
But see, the thing, if you read the autobiography of George Mueller and you read the introduction, he says there wasn't anything special about his faith.
Right.
He was trying to show that everybody can have great faith if you just trust the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so people think there's something unusual about him, and that's not the case. So
real quick, Haps says he has a question if we're watching on Facebook. So yes, we are watching on Facebook. So
Haps, just join us.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
just even better.
He's got a setup.
Yeah, and so let me see, because I saw that Chris had some. He said, "Okay, thank you for your response, Andrew. I just follow a lot of ministries that don't use ads, so I just want to ask." Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, we used to have ads when we did the live shows. When we did the live academies, because we used a platform where they did that, and man, did they used to. I mean, they had pretty vile commercials. So yeah.
I think we have a guest backstage that may have.
Yeah, we do. So you want to bring in Melissa?
I will.
All right. Hey, Melissa, how are you?
Hi, doing good.
Have you on?
I was. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay.
No, what are you saying? I don't hear anything.
I know you just talked to me. I don't know. I thought you might have just said something, you know. No, well, anyway, I'll set up with what I have to ask. A few months ago, my niece's daughter died. I think they believe she died. I'm not totally sure if it's true, but she died from fentanyl overdose.
Okay.
Like they think she took a pill.
And this was who again?
It's my niece's daughter.
Niece's daughter. Okay.
Her name's Trinity, and she died so suddenly, and I was wondering how should I grieve, because I just like I was thinking like God's good, but it's just like it just hit me all hard with, because I don't know for sure if she's a Christian, so it hit me really hard. So I was like, what should we do? Like, how should we mourn when someone we know is not Christian, and how should we deal with that?
Well, I mean, one thing that we have to realize is obviously God is sovereign, and they have enough knowledge to know God exists. Every human being does. And so in those last moments of life, even, they may have repented. They would know enough, maybe through hearing the gospel or knowing that they're maybe, as someone is overdosing and they're realizing it, and they're realizing the mistake, and they plead to God. That could happen. We don't know. So we're going to trust God's sovereignty. And as it says in the end of Revelation, God's going to wipe away every tear.
Yeah.
So even though we think this side of heaven is going to be impossible, I mean, look, I have no reason to believe that my mother is in heaven. As far as I know, she remained Jewish up until her death, you know, not being a Christian.
Yeah, that's even harder. That's your mom.
So, yeah, and people think it's so vile of me to, how could you say that about your mother? Because it's true.
Yeah.
It's not about what I like or not like. My wishful thinking doesn't make it true or not.
Yeah.
I have to accept that God knows better than me what he's doing. But on that day, when I'm before him, I will understand perfectly. And then I will know, even though this is my mother and now my stepmother who is entered eternity, either way, I'm going to realize that God knows better what he's doing. And I'm just going to have to, I will then have a better view of things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the reality. So we just trust the Lord.
Trust that he's good.
And we're going to hope that God redeemed her in the last moments. But if not, we're going to have a right understanding of how infinitely holy God is and how sinful we are. And we're going to understand that that was the right thing. I mean, if you think back a couple of weeks ago when we had Ben Zion on, he couldn't believe how dare I say that he is as wicked comparatively to Hitler. I mean, he went nuts. But when you compare how infinitely holy God is, then yeah, all of us are not far from Hitler, right?
Yeah.
We're going to have a real understanding of that, I believe, when we stand before God. So, just trust God. He knows better than you and I what he's doing.
Is there any Bible verses you could give, or just that?
Well, offhand, I mean, I think that, I mentioned the Revelation 20, right?
Oh,
about
yeah.
wiping away every tear. But I think that when you look at really all of the passages of how holy God is, I mean, I think of Isaiah 6, when Isaiah sees the glory of God, the only thing he sees about him and the wonderful people, the chosen race, all he sees is their sinfulness and
Yeah.
his own sinfulness.
Yeah, I think he say something like he was undone. Like
He's undone. He's undone people, and that's what happens when you see how really who God is. We won't see ourselves as good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah, I think that answered it. Good. Thank you.
yeah.
Check out my podcast, Truth Be Told Radio. Sorry, I like to plug myself.
I didn't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I said I like people to check out Truth Be Told Radio. I said I like to plug myself.
Yeah, I know you do. That's your
Okay.
podcast been doing for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you,
Well,
everybody.
thank you for
Who are
being
here
faithful
listening.
in doing that.
Thank you for everybody who's listening, and hope your answers get answered. Your questions get answered. And bye for now.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. All right. Now we did have a couple others here that I saw. Before we get back to you, because I did want to get to Ben's thing, but I want to stay a little bit in context here. I saw one John asked. Here it is. Is Drew or Andrew Calvinists?
Yes. I know you don't put the label on yourself,
Right.
but I have no problem putting it on myself because I know what it means. But yeah, I don't have problem with people when people call me Calvinist. I do prefer Reformed because a lot of people say Calvinism and it just focuses on predestination and election. And Calvin was very vast in his theological explanations in many topics. But we don't just follow Calvin. Reformed theology begins with sola scriptura. And so that's our foundation. That's where we start. And truth be told, I have Calvin's Institutes. I've barely read them because I can go beyond
Calvin.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're right. I don't go by the label Calvinist because I don't know what someone else means by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so a label is only good if we're using the same definition.
Right.
And so if someone asks me, are you a Calvinist? I will say, what do you mean by that? Okay. Because if they have the same definition as me, I'm going to be a Calvinist. I have some, I still remember the first time, I think it was a Matt Slick's radio program. And it's one of the questions he asked, so are you a Calvinist? And I said, well, I've had people tell me that I'm a heretic because I'm a Calvinist. And I've had people that tell me I'm a heretic because I'm not a Calvinist. The only thing everyone agrees on is I'm a heretic.
You're a heretic.
Okay. So it depends on the definition. Both sides call me a heretic. So, and we'll probably get to, there was a question Haps asked, and that may then expose where some people think I'm a heretic, one way or another. But so yeah. So I want to, let's get to, you kind of explained why you said, okay, enough's enough with Ben.
Yeah. And
after that, I threw out one more email to Ben Zion because he asked, right? And I just said, okay, this will be my final thing. If he doesn't answer it, because I asked the question and he went off answering something else. And I'm like, hey,
See, that's weird because I tried to shift the conversation and get him to answer something else, and he didn't want to go to it.
Yeah. So here's what I ended up saying. I said, Ben, you said, quote, no, unquote, Jewish person would interpret Alma as virgin. Therefore, if I could produce just one rabbi, then your whole argument is wrong, and you must admit you're being dishonest in continuing this argument. Right now, do you follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. He said no Jewish person would do this.
Right.
All I need is one. But if I have one that's a rabbi, because he didn't say no rabbi, he said no Jewish person. So if I have one Jewish person, then I have it. Well, we gave one on the show, and that was Matthew. Mm-hmm. And well, actually, he claimed Matthew. I claimed whoever translated the Hebrew into Greek for Isaiah in the Septuagint. So I just said, in Jewish tradition, some commentators and scholars interpret the Hebrew word Alma in Isaiah 7:14 as referring to a young woman who is also a virgin. right? Because that was the argument I was making. She happens to also be a virgin. One notable commentator who had this view, and I'm not going to do a good job on the name, but Rabbi Shlomo Yaksik, also known as Rashi, he was from 1040 to 1105. Rashi, an influential medieval commentator, translated Alma as virgin in his commentary on that verse. His interpretation had a significant impact on substantial Jewish thought and continues to be referred to those who support the understanding of Alma as virgin in this context. And so it's interesting because if you go out to, and I was looking this up as you were talking just because I was curious, because this kind of makes some of my point that I had with him, is one of the things I had said is, how does he know that that we are not having a response to Christianity?
Mhm.
And so it was interesting because when I went out to there's a website, the Jewish Virtual Library, and you could look up, some of his stuff, and it looks like they translated as young woman, which the earlier translations had as virgin. So it's kind of interesting. But so I put that out there for him to respond. So now we'll see if he does. He hasn't as of, when did I send that out? May 29th, and now it is June 1st. So we can give him time. He could be busy, right?
Yep.
So, but what am I doing with that? I'm saying, okay, I only need to produce one, but if it's a rabbi, okay. So
Not only that, a rabbi from a medieval period.
yeah. Because my argument is the Septuagint was done before the time of Christ, so they had no reason to translate it as virgin before Christ if that wasn't a viable translation of the word, right? So, and we already discussed it last time. He had already conceded that a young woman, a maiden, what makes her a maiden is that she's not married. Assuming she was a virgin. So
would that make him a Jewish person that says Alma can mean virgin?
Maybe he's not. Maybe we'll have the no true Scotsman fallacy, and he'll say, well, no true Jewish person would say. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see if he responds. So, okay. KT gave this for you, Melissa. This is toward you. And she probably had an earlier comment that I missed. Okay, here it is. So I'll put this one up first. KT said, it's a reminder that you could die anytime, and people need to consider that their relationship with God, focus on the living person God sees in the long view. Now, I'll say this to that. I was going to say to Melissa is, one thing that I remember asking Ray Comfort when my mother-in-law, attempted to take her life, and I'm like, how do I deal with this? And Ray, Ray had said, if you're, because at that point, I didn't know what was happening. And Ray was like, look, if your mother was to die, know that the message she'd have for people, if she could come back. Now my mother-in-law is a believer, but it would be that you come to know Christ, right? That there's a real hell and real heaven. And that's the thing we can always say is if your niece's daughter was to come back, the message she would have for you is to repent.
Yeah.
I
want to comment on this comment by KT and Jesus real quick.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder you can die at any time. Now, if you think back to 9/11, after the Sunday after 9/11, John MacArthur preached a message. And he says of that time that the church was packed. People were flooding into the church. And what was the message he said? The message he gave was that you can die at any time. Those people who died in the towers, they didn't think that was going to be their last day.
Yeah.
It was.
I think that was the most preached message. Yeah. So KT said, I mean, he is working. He is sovereign, has sovereign purposes. The Trusting God in Trying Times series is good. That's from Don Green. Give your niece that book, perhaps. And then I think she corrected it here. She said, you might get your niece. Yeah, no, she just said it again, but didn't tagged Melissa. So, I see Eric. I don't see him on camera, but we'll see if I may actually know who this is, but we'll bring him in. He's got something covering the camera is what it is. Can you hear us? Oh, there we go.
Hey.
Hello, Eric.
How are you? I'm laying in
Good.
my bed in the Dominican Republic. I thought I would tune in.
I was wondering if
my
this was
screen open.
Yeah, for good reason. I mean, people might know how to hack into your computer and
I always
Here
keep
we
tape
are.
over it. Yeah. Creepy world we live in.
yeah. So well,
Yeah.
welcome. So Eric is your website's not live yet, right?
Well, no.
It's just starting.
You have
So
access.
we could plug it, but people not much there yet.
It's a journey. It's not what I was. I enjoy sprinting sometimes, and it's not going to be a sprint.
So history777.org is your website. Still a work in progress, folks, but you can check it out. And so you're suffering for Christ there in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Looking to catch some wind, I believe, right?
Yes. Four amazing days, and today was bad. And the rest of this is the struggle. The rest of the 10 days I'm here is supposed to be terrible if you look at the forecast. So I was thinking about flying home tomorrow. I want to work on my website. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do, And Robin's like, I was praying and I said, Lord, move my wife, move Robin if you want me to stay. And my buddy's Dominican friend who trained him kite surfing has a very unusual concept of God compared to us. So I'm like, wow, this could be an opportunity. So
there you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, instead of kite surfing, maybe you should do something like Witness. And
well, I was working on that this afternoon.
Okay. So let's give a little history. Drew, you'll get a kick out of this. Dr. Silvestro, myself, we go out to a local college. And would it be fair to say we dragged you, Eric?
No. I went to Mike Riddle's conference down in North Carolina, and I got a hold of Anthony and said, if I waste this opportunity, it was apologetics week-long conference. And I said, if I waste this, that alone is sin. And I said, I've got to go with you to state. And here I meet.
Oh, so that's what spurred it. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how I met you. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
We were sitting there, Drew. It was hysterical because we're sitting there and I'm literally just watching Anthony as he's up on this little ledge and he's sharing the gospel, no crowd. And I could see where he's looking. And I turned to Eric and I said, Anthony is speaking to that one girl over there, and I described the shirt she was wearing.
Yes.
And it was almost as if on cue, I said, now what Anthony is trying to get her to respond. And once she responds, and I literally was like, I said, once she responds, she gets up and says something.
30 seconds. And he looked at me and he said, see her? You see what her shirt says? It said, row, row, row your boat. And he goes, and he told me one of two things she would do. And within 30 seconds, she got up and started to, engage. It was
and
great.
I said, as soon as she got up, there'd be a crowd.
Yep.
And he was like, and I was like,
the whole campus was there. I was like, cops are coming over. I was like, oh no.
Yeah,
Leave it to Anthony.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, it was, and it was for your first time out. That was a little stressful, but it wasn't your last time out, so that was good.
No, I've been going to Akron. I went back to Cleveland State once. It's been really, really good. I'm due to go back out though. I've been dormant for 3 months, 2 months, 3 months.
Well, school's out, so there's not going to be anyone there. You're going to have to wait.
Yeah.
So you have any questions for us tonight?
Man, I just realized you were on, and I left my buddies out on the balcony, and I just ran in and plugged in. So no, I'm just jumping in now. Cold. All I have is wind on my mind. So I didn't want to miss it. So I thought I'd jump in. So no, I'm sorry. I missed the whole front end.
No, that's fine. Well, I hope you enjoy the kite surfing, but at the same time, practice what you've been learning with Mike Riddle and get out there sharing the gospel and doing some apologetics.
Yeah.
So for folks to know, Eric goes to college campuses and tries to get spur conversations just with the students, just one-on-one conversations, and using apologetics. He's got a background in science, so that makes it a lot of more interesting, shall we say, when you have people that claim, well, I know science. You can't know science and be a Christian.
I know science. I watch the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be one of the topics I did have, because someone asked about the fact that there was, I guess, an article, and I didn't get a chance to get to it in time, but I guess there was an article that the CDC, the people who were supposed to be during COVID deciding on vaccinations and how to prevent spread, kept getting together for conferences. And it turns out that the people who went, even vaccinated people that went to more of these conferences with the CDC, got COVID. And so someone asked, can we now say that the CDC conferences about vaccines are super spreaders? But I couldn't read the full article to see what they were actually saying. So.
Right. And now the WHO has just, I don't know if you guys saw that, but they have recognized that this vaccine is causing MS, that the spike protein, the T4 cells, it's starting to target and kill the myelin sheaths on the nervous system, and a higher incidence of MS is occurring in the population in vaccinated people. And it was right on the WHO website. Now, I didn't vet that out, but it came from that guy over in England. What's his name? John. He does those. He's a nurse, and he's brilliant. The guy puts all the science out.
Okay.
He's got like 3 million viewers. And
I think I know who you're talking about. I don't know the name, but
I suspect it's accurate. So, anyways, more good news.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, I was an anti-vaxxer. I'm like, whatever. The medical community has lost its mind. But whatever.
Okay, so KT said, kite surfing? I wasn't listening well. So you want to explain what kite surfing is to those who may not be aware of this very dangerous sport?
It looks like you're standing on a snowboard, and you have a harness around your waist and a nice long set of lines that go up to a big old kite that you fly above your head, and it drags you across the water, and you can jump in the air, and it's just the greatest thing. Next to Jesus and my wife.
I was when you said greatest thing and you paused, I was like, oh, you're about to get yourself in trouble, because you said Robin is right there. All right. Well, if you think, I'll put you backstage. If you think of a question you want to ask, just there's a private chat and you could do that there.
I am tuned in. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So Drew, Melissa's asking, what's Drew's last name? And his show's called what again? What's that show you do? It's Chris Huff's show that I pretend to be on. I think that's the name.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I was thinking that's what we should change the name to, because that's about what it is. But Chris Honholtz beat us to it. My last name is Vonita, and the show is Matter of Theology.
There you go.
And I also started, there's a YouTube page for Matter of Theology, and I've got 2 videos on there now. So I plan on trying to do some more video content as well as more podcasting content.
Okay, so one of the things I was going to start with was a tweet that I got. And I had posted, for folks who may not be aware, we're not big fans of the TV series or movie series, whatever you call it, The Chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And they had basically there was a, support for the LGBT. They had a flag, the gay pride flag on set, and people saw it. Now, Daily Wire did an article about it, and the CEO of Daily Wire said it sickened him or whatever. He was sad that they did that article. The reality is, I shared it and I posted, and I basically, had the point that, I don't think it's the gay pride flag, because they're not about gays. They're about way more than that. And actually they, the transgenders don't like the gays because the gays are going, hey, this is just, we don't want all this other craziness. Mm-hmm. So not everyone's fully on board. It's really the anti-Christian flag.
Right.
Because that's their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I made a comment about this. And so somebody shared a tweet that they shared with me. And when they shared it with me, they said, "Take that, Andrew." Okay. So
Andrew goes, challenge accepted.
Yeah, actually, no, I didn't even bother responding. But there's something that was said that I found interesting what he shared. So the thing that he shared with me is it's a guy that says, the people telling you to boycott The Chosen or a Chick-fil-A are probably not Christians. They are cultural conservatives looking for something to be upset about. Boycotting a TV series about the life of Christ because there are sinners involved in the production is a clear sign you don't understand the gospel at all. Okay. So you want me to take an support for an anti-Christian agenda? So I'm not really a Christian if I don't support an anti-Christian agenda.
Right. Apparently. Christians are supposed to be tolerant of all things, Andrew.
Yeah. There's a scripture verse that talks about that. Yeah, it's Matthew chapter 7. I said we'd get there.
Mm-hmm. It's a good segue.
Yeah, we go. Get those.
You've been doing this for a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. I mean, that is the passage. I mean, every non-believer knows for Christians.
Right. That's it.
I wonder, what could that mean, though? Do you think, Drew, I don't know, is this possible? Do you think if I read the next verse, I might understand what it means not to judge?
I think, I do think there are more verses that follow verse number 1.
Let's look at that. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. Mm-hmm. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. It almost sounds like he's not saying you shouldn't judge. It sounds like he's giving a warning that if you're going to judge people wrongly, you're going to be judged by that same standard.
Right. Right.
In fact, he goes on to say, it's amazing when you just keep reading the next verse. Mm-hmm. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not notice the log that's in your own? Mm-hmm. Or how could your brother say, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite.
This just gets better and better.
Yeah. First, take out the log out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And then this next verse, kind of interesting, the context. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces.
I could be wrong here. That sounds almost like a judgment.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
So, wait, this is the words of Jesus. We know that because they're in red letters.
They're the most important, right?
Yeah, they are. And so, do you think could Jesus have sinned?
No.
So if Jesus said this as a judgment, he couldn't have judged people and it be a sin to judge, right?
Mm.
Mm. You know, a bunch of liberal scholars got together, I think in the late 80s, I think maybe early 90s, and it was called the Jesus Seminar, not Jesus Seminar.
I think that's what it is. Yeah, the Jesus Seminar. Yeah.
And they got together and they each had a black ball, a pink ball, and a red ball. And they took all of the red letterings in the Bible and decided whether Jesus actually said those things. A black ball meant Jesus definitely did not say this. A pink ball said maybe Jesus said this. And a red ball, Jesus said it. And I believe in the end, there was only one passage, one verse that everyone agreed Jesus said.
Do not
Do
judge.
not judge that you will not be judged. That's the only thing they could all agree Jesus must have said. Now, we talked about throwing pearls before swine. We see that in the context of Jesus condemning people for their hypocrisy in the way they judge others.
Right.
Folks, you've all seen this, I'm sure. When someone is judging you and you're looking at their life and going, pot meet kettle.
Right.
You're sitting there looking at someone who is judging you for something you know they do far worse.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you do it, you know they're worse at it.
Yeah.
And
we call them politicians. Yes.
They would never do that. No, we can always trust the government. If the NSA is listening, always trust government. Always trust government. Okay.
FBI, I'm on your side. Okay. I'm on your side. I'm not a whistleblower.
I'm not a whistleblower. I don't want to disappear. Well,
please don't suicide me.
Hey, you can always be a whistleblower against Trump and you're going to be protected.
Right.
Even if you're not actually a whistleblower, they'll claim you are one and you're protected. Your name and identity, we got to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see about throwing the pearls before swine, as we were talking with when to walk away from a conversation, that's actually not directly used in that context, but it is something that it's talking about judging. Mm-hmm. It's talking about hypocritical judgment. Mm-hmm. And there is a thing where when you're trying to reason with someone that is that hypocritical, they got a log in their eye and all they could do is see this little speck in yours. It is you're offering something holy to people who they don't want to trample you. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so there is a passage of scripture, though, that does tell us how to handle when we have someone that's like this. Because the question we were starting with, right, is when do we walk away from a conversation? Mm-hmm. Well, I'll encourage those of you who are not driving or kite surfing for Eric. Well, maybe he might be talented enough and have a waterproof Bible and he can kite surf while looking up Titus chapter 3. But Titus 3, starting in verse 8, and real key is going to be verse 10, but it says this is a trustworthy statement. And according to these things, I want you to speak confidently so that those who have believed God will be careful to engage in good deeds. These things are good and profitable for men, but avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and strife and disputes about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. Reject a factious man after the first and second warning, knowing that such a man is perverted and is sinning being self-condemned. Mm-hmm. So this is something that says, hey, we only give them one or two warnings and then be done with them. Now, that doesn't mean we're done with them, just we have one conversation type of thing. It's the idea that when you see someone who just is, they constantly want to debate these foolish controversies or genealogies, it disputes the law. Is it limited to that? No, those are the things that they were doing in Paul's day. The idea is when someone is making an argument, they just want to keep arguing over something and just that it is unprofitable. Mm-hmm. You warn them once, you warn them twice, and you're done. And that's like we did with Ben, right? We said it on the show, we said it in the email, mm-hmm. and I'm done, right? I like what Gabe Hughes does. If you haven't heard, the what videos, I just drew a blank on what it means. When we understand the text, That's what the what stands for. But Gabe said that one of the policies he has for social media is when he puts out something and someone disagrees with him, criticizes him, he will offer one correction. They still don't. They ignore what he says. Then he just does a second thing of thank him for the time. Have a good day.
Mm-hmm.
So he has like a 2-comment policy with people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really good. That's practicing this out and saying, hey, gave you a chance, done with it. Right?
Well, I mean, it's like our friend Pastor Darren says, how to know when to walk away from a conversation. Rule 1, if it's on Twitter, walk away.
Yeah. Like this guy who told me, like somehow I'm stuck. I don't know how to answer that, that guy's claim. I don't see anything in the Bible that talks about the chosen or Chick-fil-A being a standard of Christian. I don't see that as a definition of Christian in the Bible, right? Can I answer it? Sure, I just did.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, but in getting into the topic of social media is not the best medium to have those conversations.
Hence, even sometimes an email. Hence, I asked Ben that come in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Chris is telling me I should stop being logical. Yeah, I hate when that logic stuff gets in the way. Yeah. So, when we look at this, we have to realize that you have to do some evaluating of the person
mm-hmm.
and seeing whether that person is going to be reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Pastor Darren says, reading things according to context is racist. Well, I know he meant this as a joke, but let's take it in one aspect. When you have someone that starts reading in motives for you that you don't have. I mean, I've said this for a decade now, that when my policy is when you tell me what I think or my motives are, what I believe, and I correct you, and you tell me that my motives better than I know my motives, I'm done with you. You're not being reasonable. And that is, for me, that's when I end a conversation. Mm-hmm. Because I now know I'm not dealing with a reasonable person. I don't know Drew's heart better than Drew does.
Right.
Can Drew be deceived? Yes. Can I be deceived? Yes. But I know one thing for sure. According to 1 Corinthians 13, if Drew says this was my motive, I trust that because he's a believer. Now, unless I'm questioning that, but I'm not with Drew. But you accept that that's what he says is his motive. Unless you're proven otherwise somehow, you accept that.
And there are some places in conversation where you can't tell. And so you have to stop and say, okay, what are you getting at? What's your point? Now, with people that I know really well, I know when they're asking a clarifying question or they're just kind of giving their opinion and whatnot. But some people that I don't know very well, I'll say, what's your motive? Chickens. Chickens is my motive.
I mean, whenever the chickens show up, we should put them in. So, I mean, just for, John is here. He likes to let us see his chickens. So there they are. Okay. John is a regular, and he's got now it's summertime and his chickens are out. That's why he's called the Chicken Man. he said chicken. His name tonight was Chicken Man Returns. So had to put them in. But yeah, when you have someone that's going to tell you what your KT says, chicken therapy time. And Chris Arnold, well, that's random. Of course. But
I've had some run-ins with
Drew was practicing his segues and he did well.
Yeah. It came in, I adjusted accordingly.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what we end up seeing is that when we do have someone who is just being completely irrational, and I believe that someone telling you what you believe. I mean, the first time I had this experience that I remember is her name was Heidi. Turned out that I found out that she was going after Matt Slick and others just as bad as she was going after me. But she used to have a thing where when Facebook first started and you could block someone and unblock them and reblock them and there was no time limit.
Mm-hmm.
She used to, tell me that I'm a Calvinist. I'm going to hell because I believe that God does not allow us to make any choices and he forces us to sin. And then she'd block me so I can't remove it. And the only reason I knew it was because everyone would comment. She's actually the first person I blocked because when they put you had to wait 6 months before you could block someone again, she did that and she couldn't reblock me. I'm like, I could block her. And she would create different accounts and do it again. But she told me I'm like, I remember saying to her, look, that's not what I believe. I said, my doctrinal statement is there. It's been online for years. And her response, she said, you're hiding your real beliefs. And I still remember I said, look, one of the two of us knows what I believe better than the other. And I think I'm the expert here on what I believe, right? And so at that point, you're not dealing with someone who is, as you said, debating in good faith. I would say just not being reasonable. Chris Hunholz is saying here, irrational. He said, like the guy that became entirely unglued when he found out I was a law enforcement. I was wondering what Leo was, and started calling me an oath breaker and a Nazi. Unhinged people are not worth your time, and that is true. You just but it's a fine line. Like, at what point are they just trying to fight against the goad?
Right. When I was, this was about when the whole, after the George Floyd stuff, when the real autopsy started coming out.
Wait, stop. That's the hero, George Floyd.
Right. Yes. Where they raised all the money, and then the neighborhood where he died is now in ruins. Yes.
Yeah.
That guy. Yeah. So when the real autopsy came out that showed it was a fentanyl overdose, I shared the autopsy on Facebook, and this guy that we grew up together. His dad was one of my basketball coaches. His dad was one of the top 5 greatest men I've ever known in my life. He starts calling me a racist.
Who are the other 4?
It's secret. Are you hoping you're in the top 5?
I'm not even in the, dude. I'm so far down. You can't count that high.
But he started calling me a racist, and I'm going, really? We grew up together. If there's anyone that knows I'm not a racist, it's you. And then he just kept calling me a racist, and I said, all right, okay, I'm a racist, and then walked away.
Yeah. And that's the thing to do. And on Twitter, yeah. So let's see. So let me see some comments we have here. Chris Honhold said, always great to jump online when Andrew and Drew are on the air. It's better than that, Chris Honholz?
When Chris Honholz is on the air.
There we go. When Chris Honholz jumps in to join us. Okay, so I guess this was Hap's big question here. Beef bacon or pork bacon? LOL.
I'm going pork bacon.
Dude, what, are you kidding me?
No.
It has to be beef.
No, it's pork.
God made it clear. All right.
Have you ever had pork bacon? I mean, from a pig? That's what God made them
kosher.
Look, I love
kosher.
I love ham. I love bacon. I love pulled pork.
And it's all because of Christ that you can love them.
Exactly. and I enjoy it to the glory of God.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to some of these questions we had here. So John had asked earlier, what are your thoughts on Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, I think they're wonderful people who out of a love for Christ come to my door and want to share with me the truth of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Other than that, they're going to hell. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so Jehovah's Witnesses, I'll encourage you, John, if you're not familiar, I will encourage you, get my book, What Do They Believe? It will go over an overview of what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. But in case you're not aware, some of the major things that they would hold to. One, they don't believe Jesus Christ is God. That's a major one.
Mhm.
They believe that he is the first created being, that God created Michael the archangel, who came to earth as Jesus, returned in the form of Michael, and then Michael created all things.
Mhm.
So, major issues there. Colossians 1:15-18, read that section. It's very clear that Jesus created all things. If he created all things, he could not be a created thing. That's why in their translation, they have to say 4 times there, all other things, because they want to say Jesus was created.
Mhm.
And they say,
what's the verse? To which of his angels has he ever said, "Sit at my right hand until I make your..."
yes, that is in Hebrews, I think Hebrews 1, quoting, I think if I remember correctly, Psalm 2.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I mean, but you look at the context there, it's very clearly that you don't need to add the word other actually changes the meaning.
Mhm.
It's not there in the Greek. So that's the biggest thing. And that's why my question, when I see the Jehovah's Witnesses out there and they're there for people to ask questions, my question is always this: why did Jesus have to be God? And they're like, oh, well, we don't believe he is. I know, but why did he have to be God? And they go, well, we don't believe he is God. I know, but why did he have to be God? And eventually they go, well, you tell me. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Right? And I'll go, he had to be God if he was a payment for our sin, because if we think that we can sin against an infinitely holy God who is infinitely holy, and we think that just a little time in non-existence would in a soul sleep is going to make up for it. No, we have an infinite consequence because he's infinitely holy and infinitely just and infinitely wrathful and going to punish those with an infinite consequence. So only an infinite being can pay an infinite fine, because it would take us an infinity to pay it. So he had to be God if he was a payment of sin for us. If Jesus Christ is not God, then we're dead in our sin, and we all will be in hell. So if you deny that he's God, you have hell to look forward to, and I don't want that for you. That's how I open with Jehovah's Witnesses. And we actually, so we timed this once. Anthony and I were in Florida with our families, and we saw a stand, and we're like, well, first thing before we walked around, we were like, let's go over and talk to Jehovah's Witnesses. This is what it's like with Anthony and I. This is what, our poor families are like,
again.
So I said, okay, let's have some fun with it at least. I said, before we got out of the car, I said, everyone choose a time. How many minutes before they do the shift and try to get away from us?
Mm-hmm.
And I was closest. I think I said 4 minutes, or no, I think I said 2 minutes. And Anthony said 4 minutes. And I think it was like 2.5 minutes that, I said what I said in about 2 minutes, and that took 30 seconds for them to just back up and back away from us. And the other group came in, the more experienced groups.
I was just learning about evangelism, and this was right around the time I started with FedEx. And I was just listening to Dr. White explaining how to evangelize to Jehovah's Witnesses. On my way driving into work, I stopped at a gas station to get my healthy honey bun breakfast from the gas station. And wouldn't you know it, at the counter was a Jehovah's Witness giving one of the Watchtower and Tract Society pamphlets to the cashier. And I said, I guess we're doing this today. And so I said, okay, you're not going to want that. And let me tell you why. And so I started engaging with the cashier and the Jehovah's Witness. And then later that day, while I'm on the route, remember, this is my first day. I'm on the route. I'm delivering this big 70-inch TV to a house where Jehovah's Witnesses had pulled up to talk to the guy. I'm walking back down, and they say, hey, can we talk to you for a second? I guess we're doing it twice today. All right.
Yeah. So the number one thing, Jehovah's Witnesses deny the deity of Christ. Major. they don't believe in a hell, an eternal hell. They believe that when someone dies, they go into what they call soul sleep, just non-existence. And then there's a judgment where God will bless those who are his, and they will spend eternity on earth. Well, sorry, 144,000 will be on earth, and then the rest are in heaven. New heaven, new earth. You'd rather be on the new earth rather than new heaven. Okay.
Which is interesting. When they take communion, no one takes communion, because only if you're a member of the 144,000 can you.
Which, by the way, the 144,000 are quite clear in Revelation. They're all Jewish. They're of the 12 tribes of Israel. So don't know what the Gentiles do with that. But do you see what I see?
I do.
There he is, the man, the myth, the legend. Chris Huntholz of Voice of Reason Radio.
Hey guys.
Otherwise known as Captain America.
Not so much these days.
Well,
the suit don't fit like it used to.
Well, you're Captain America in my heart.
Yeah. Have you taken Chris Huntholz into your heart?
Oh,
And
don't do
accepted
that.
him as Captain America.
Have you accepted his Captain America into your heart? Okay. So this was good. So we can get some fun discussions with Chris here too. Hey, I meant to put this one up. Melissa said this from earlier. There's nothing wrong with receiving money to support your ministry.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's the thing of, look, folks, I would be happy to not run the ads on YouTube if people would support the ministry more. I'll just be honest. And I guess I should put the banner up for if I could find it. There's a support page. So if you go to strivingforturning.org/support, you could support us. Our whole ministry, and we're not a ministry that we don't have staff, payroll, things like that. We give the money toward ministry. So about, I think the last number was 76% of all the donations that come in go toward ministry, not overhead, not salaries, not things like that. And that's to help smaller churches that can't afford to get people to come out and speak, to come out. That's what we try to do. That's what most of that money is going toward, is towards travel. And so, yeah, travel costs have tripled. And so the money doesn't go like it used to, just the way it is. It does bug me with the fact of, people that somehow think like if we're monetizing YouTube or putting ads on the website, or if I ask for support, somehow I'm doing something. I'm not trusting God. Well, I am trusting God. I don't draw. I draw a small salary from the ministry, very small. It doesn't even pay my mortgage. Okay, not even half the mortgage. Actually, it pays less than half the mortgage. Okay, so it's not a lot. But the only reason they did that, they started paying me anything, was because my kids were in college and I had no way of paying it. And so I had a way of paying it, but I didn't have a way of paying their increase that they did at the second year of college. And so they said, look, we want to support you. And so, but yeah, why? Because we really want the money to go toward the mission of Striving for Fraternity, which is discipleship. And so we look for ways where we're not begging for money all the time. I don't like doing that. So,
well, if I can say something about that, Andrew, Paul himself said, in sending, letters out to the churches, talks about certain people that he sent, and he said, these are men that are worthy of your support. And he even, in talking to the churches about bringing money back or gifts back to the church in Jerusalem, the idea that we can support one another's ministries is a biblical concept. There's nothing wrong with it. The difference, I think, is that, are we going out of our way to like, hey, you need to really give if you want our ministry to succeed? That's where you're putting the pressure on somebody else to make you be successful, rather than saying, and us, we don't like to even mention it on Voice of Reason Radio at all. But it's like, if you want to support, this is how you can do it. This is a way that you can support. And then it's like, okay, Lord, I'm not gonna beat this drum into the ground. I'm not gonna guilt them over it. I'm just gonna make that available. It took a lot of effort by several people before we even did anything like a Patreon, because there is that sense where you're like, I don't want to make people feel like they have to make this happen. It's like, and I know you don't go out of your way to bring all kinds of money into the ministry. You're just trying to make the ministry have enough to be successful. So for people to say you're not trusting the Lord, what you're basically saying to Andrew and other ministries is, I don't want to have to support you. I just want you to trust God, and then God will miraculously happen. I don't have to do anything. If you say that, you make me feel bad. And honestly, folks, if you're saying that, shame on you. I mean, shame on you. These ministries, look, my ministries run out of my house. I don't even like saying ministry, but other people call it that. So Voice of Reason Radios run out of my house. Rich and I pretty much pay for the website. Somebody else maybe throws some money at us to help pay for that website once in a while. And then we have a couple people that pay through Patreon to help us pay for the monthly cost for hosting. And that's it. That helps us put the show on the air without an undue burden on us. But we're not going out and at no cost. I'll tell you this right now. I know Andrew. I know that he is going to these churches pretty much at no cost, unless maybe the church can help them get there or give them a place to stay, so that the churches are getting the apologetics training that will benefit their congregants. For you to sit there and say, well, you're not trusting God, how dare you? You want the benefit, but you don't want to be part of at least holding the rope so they can go down and do the work. I don't say that to shame anyone, but that is just that really bothers me. And this is coming from somebody. Andrew will do this on my show. He'll try to fundraise for our show. I don't do it. I don't like saying
Andrew always tries to raise money for other people.
He does. He really does. But I don't like doing that, because I don't want to guilt people into it. And I'm irritated when I hear people say, you're not trusting God. That is just shameful for someone to treat you that way, when all you're asking is, hey, if you can help, here's how.
Yeah. I remember a guy who, because I was a Christian and he was a Christian, he wanted me to give him a copy of my book, What Do They Believe? And he was like, as a Christian, you should give that away. And I still remember, I turned to him and I said, let me ask you a question. How much is 14 years of your life worth? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, that's how long it took me to study and read and get everything together for that book. 14 years of diving in and reading and studying. And you think it's just should be free. I mean, and the paper costs money too. So I should not only all that time, but I should pay for you. Like, okay, so can I do the same with you? You're paying
for service. What service do you offer? You know?
What are you going to give me for free?
Yeah. Do you have a pressure washing company? Well, you're a Christian. You should just come pressure wash my driveway for free.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about books is most people have no idea. I have several friends who are authors. One of them actually did one time. He wrote fiction, and he broke down what the actual cost of putting it together, printing it, binding it, going through the entire expense. And by the time you actually put a price tag on it and just start selling, you might be lucky if you break even. So the idea that you should give it away, well, how about this? How about you pay the people that put the books together for Andrew so he can put them together and give them away? Can you do that?
So Kofi says, that you're trusting God to provide through the ordinary means that ministry is provided for, through the kindness of God's people. So the ordinary means is you give to your church first.
Yes.
First and foremost, you give to your church, and then out of the abundance of what God has given you, beyond that, you can bless other ministries.
Yes.
And some of those ministries, as Melissa's saying, Drew, Chris, can you each let us know how we can support your ministry? I appreciate both your ministries. So then you can go to Voice of Reason Radio, Matter of Theology, and support them. So, Chris,
All right.
Drew, how can they support you?
Well, for us, there's really not a way to do that. Now, we used to have a Patreon. And the only reason we started a Patreon, so if you listen to older episodes of Matter of Theology, you'll hear me say, we do have a Patreon and yada, yada, yada. And the only reason we started that is because my mom wanted a way to give to the ministry. And so I said, well, we don't have a way for that. So we started a Patreon.
So it really was like, Dave Jackson from School of Podcasting says, you need someone other than your mom to listen to your podcast. In your case, it really was your mom.
It really was
your donor.
But then we did away with the Patreon, and we really don't have a way to do that.
Okay, so the way to do it. So if you want to donate to Matter of Theology, here's what you do: go to ChristianPodcastCommunity.org, where they are also a member. Go to the shows, find Matter of Theology, and in there at the bottom of that page is a place to leave comments. Leave the comment saying, "Can you please give us your address?" or a P.O. box or something where we can send you a check. There you go.
Yeah. All right. I guess I have to do this because Melissa, shamed me into it now. So
that's okay, because if she didn't, I was going to.
Yeah, well, there's that too. So if you go to slavetotheking.com, that has the links for all of our stuff, including the Patreon that we use. In one of these days, I really should get around to using Patreon. What it's designed to is that you provide extra content. I don't manage my time well.
Yeah.
But so one of these days, maybe we'll do that. And maybe if we get enough people wanting it, we'll do that. But if you go to that, it'll take you to the Patreon, and that will, that's how you can contribute. We used to have a one-time donation through, who was it? The one that was going to charge you all kinds of money if you did wrong speak. I forget the name of it now. Not Patreon. PayPal.
PayPal.
Yeah.
We used to do that, and then when it came out that they could, just basically dock your money right out of your own personal account. I'm like, no, I'm not going to have people who are kind enough to donate to us have their money stolen because PayPal decided I had wrong think. We don't have a single way of doing that at this time. So Patreon's the only other way. So if you're inclined to, it's set up for monthly. I think I've had some people suggest some other means to me. I just got to look into them.
If you want to support Chris Hohenholz personally in his next career, you could give the money to Striving for Eternity. Just mark, Chris Hohenholz, chief blogger.
No.
And when we have enough money, he has no more excuse why he can't work for us because the money's there for him. No,
this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So he thinks it's going to happen.
I'm trying. Darren says, Drew, you should set up a Substack, brother. Much better than Patreon. So we can do that. I have to look into that. So Melissa did ask, okay, so if I can't pay my mortgage from the ministry, how do I pay my mortgage? And so the answer to that is I still have side work that I'm capable of doing. I don't require a lot of sleep. And so I have a background in cybersecurity and things like that. And so I have other means that I can do. And I do that because I don't want, there's two reasons. One, I don't want to have to try to raise enough money from ministry that money would go toward feeding my family versus ministry. I want the money going toward ministry. So all of our speakers, Anthony, Frank, people who've spoken with us before, anyone that speaks in the future, we have other means of income so that we could do ministry with the ministry money. That's kind of our mindset. The other reason is very simple. I'll be honest with you. Folks that don't know a lot about the way parachurch ministries work, when they start getting big, they have salaries. When they have salaries, they don't want to fire people. And now they're stuck when bad times come, like we're in now, where people have to make decisions. How do we keep the money coming in? And for the sake of salary, it sounds good. You're taking care of those people working for you. You make decisions that are not good. We don't have that problem. If my salary is gone, my salary is gone. Would it affect our living? Sure. But it's not going to put me in the poorhouse because I have other means. You know, I just pick up another job or something, you know. So KT said Andrew could snoop into our computers probably, so be careful. Chris Hunholz may know a thing or two about that. We got to find out what episode that is.
I don't remember.
Someone should binge. Someone please go back and binge all
That's
of
7
Voice
years
of
worth,
Reason.
dude.
It'll be worth it. But
Okay, hold on. I might
you-
be able to make that happen because we've got somebody who discovered our show who is literally like going through 7 years of shows and is commenting on almost every one of them. So
ask them,
next
ask
show,
them to-
I'll just ask that particular user, hey, go find this for
well, if they're listening in order, it's going to be a long time before they hear that.
I can't tell how they're doing it. It's random. I'm going. Did
You got to respond to the comment.
I know it's definitely within the last three years.
Yeah, it's gotta be. So
that was crazy.
Chris, D says Paul was a tent maker, just to be in context. So you want to share that story since we brought up, because this is a podcaster note. Don't just mention inside stories without explaining them. If you get an inside joke, you got to explain it. So, Chris, I'll let you do the honor of this one because
I swear we've told this a half a dozen times already. So I'm sure everybody knows it, but in case there's new. So Andrew has had a running joke about having, being able to spy on me.
Stop.
Right?
You think it's a running joke?
So, one time we're recording and I forget what prompted it, but I think we were talking about, the little sound bites and stuff that you tend to grab. And we were talking about having, you.
Innocent little me?
Poor Rich. Yeah, you're giving him a complex. I'm just saying. But then
I can't believe you could say that I would do. I mean,
see that, although I haven't been frequently. Try that again.
I don't know what you're referring to.
I was listening to the latest episode of Voice of Reason, and he did the same thing.
Yeah, don't tell Andrew that. He'll go find it. But so anyway, and I think we were having gremlin issues that night, and I made a joke. It's probably Andrew's fault. He's got cameras spying on us. And as I'm saying this while we are recording, Andrew is real time, not realizing that we're saying these things, is commenting, because I always ask, hey, we're getting ready to record. Please, please pray for us. And Andrew made a comment, oh, I already know. I have cameras in your house. I'm reading that as I had just made the comment. I lost. Rich is trying to say something. I lose it. I'm busting up like nobody's business. Andrew has no clue at this point what just happened. And it's not until later when he hears that and he starts dying laughing because he goes like, wait, what? So literally, it was the most perfect timing. We had just said it. Rich is starting to move on. I see Andrew's comment, and that was the end. We lost the show. It was complete pandemonium after that.
Or I hacked into your camera. So I should. Pastor Darren Steed has outed me.
Uh-oh.
He's outed me.
Does that to people.
Yeah, here we go. He knows my full-time job. He said, Andrew has a full-time job raising fundraising for everyone else's ministry. Yes.
That's true. That's true.
ET says, Andrew could do an AI thing with my voice. Scary. Yeah, I probably could. I think
Don't give him ideas, JT.
I have a great idea. Okay.
No.
Next episode, Drew, how much would you like to hear Chris Hunholz accepting a job offer and striving for eternity?
KT, you and I are going to have a talk, sister. Why did you do this?
All right.
That's a great idea.
Let's see if we can get through some of these questions kind of quickly. So Haps had asked, it wasn't really a question, I guess it was, but he just said, explain limited atonement. So let's go through this, because this is where I think I may end up differing with both Drew and Chris. Now, I'm going to say, and there's a term that I've been hearing lately called classic Calvinist, and that would be more in line with what I am. So there is, and there is a book that that I'm going to be reading. It is called, I'm trying to look it up. From Heaven He Came and Sought Her, Definite Atonement in a Historical, Biblical, Theological, and Pastoral Perspective. And it's several different articles, but there is an article by Carl Trueman on John Owens on the nature of Christ's satisfaction. The issue being is that John Owens' work of Death of Death really changed for many the view of, or some would say, the view of what a limited atonement is. So I would argue that a limited atonement means quite clearly that there are those in hell. Everyone except the universalists believe the atonement is limited.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Unless you believe everyone's going to heaven or everyone is going to hell, we believe the atonement is limited. And so with that, we recognize the fact that there are those in hell, it's limited, but now the question is, by what standard? What is it that limits? So, and really the question comes down to the sufficiency, the efficacy of the atonement. It comes to the issue of who did Christ die for?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's deal with these things. I'm going to give my view. I'm then going to let these brothers correct me. So I'm okay with it. So when even the Puritans, when you read a lot of the Puritans, you will see them speak of the fact that Christ's death was sufficient for all, effective or efficient for few. And that is the idea that, did Christ die for all people or only for the elect? And this is the way it's often discussed. So the issue that I have, that I bring up, is we got to look at Scripture. So 1 John 2:2. It says, and I'll back up and read verse 1. My little children, I am writing to you these things so you may know, so that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he himself is the propitiation of our sins, and not ours only, but also those of the whole world. Now, there's the issue here is Christ is clearly, the text is saying Christ is a propitiation. That's a big fancy word. It means the satisfaction. It means that it was the payment, that it satisfied the Father. Christ's death satisfied the Father. Now, the issue is, who's the world? Does world always mean world? Okay, well, world can mean every human being, but it doesn't have to. But whole world qualifies it. Okay, granted, that qualifies it. But that could be the whole world, just meaning all the people groups. That's a fair reading of it. And I'm going to take for granted, I'm going to assume that's the position that Chris and Drew will take. However, the real thing I think we have to battle with is who is the not us. Because whoever the us are, the not us, Christ died for. And there's a couple things here. I think he answers that in verse 1, my little children. He's telling us who the us are. So the not us are those who are not the children. So I don't believe this is the Jewish-Gentile distinction, because I think that is already passed at that point. Okay. So I wrote in my notes here on this passage, I say the key to this text is the question of who is being spoken of in the text. There are two groups of people mentioned, that Jesus is a propitiation for sin, us and not us. Thus, the question is, who is the us? Many will claim that it refers to Jews and Gentiles. However, by the time of 1 John, there was not a Jew-Gentile issue anymore. Furthermore, there was no reference in 1 John to the Jew-Gentile distinction. Therefore, that does not seem to fit the context. John was addressing the issue of the Gnostics, not Jews, Gentiles. The context, I moved my cursor and I lost the thing. The context provides the answer in verse 1. The us is my little children. This was John's way to speak of believers. So if the us are an our are referring to believers, then the not of us only must refer to non-believers. So I am of the position, I could say Christ died for all people. Now, I could say that as a human, not being infinite in my understanding and knowledge. I can say Christ died for you to an unbeliever from this passage and say that his death was sufficient, but it wasn't applied to them if they die without Christ. In its application, it was not effective. Now, in God's mind, did he know who he would die for? Well, yeah, because he knows everything. So he knew who it was applied to and who it wasn't. But, and this is a poor example, but it's the example that I give. If I go into a restaurant and I say, I share the gospel, I just openly say, I'm paying for everyone's meal. I just want to share the gospel with you. There's going to be someone that's going to be, I'm paying my own meal, even though I paid it. And I know this because I actually did this in a restaurant where we shared the gospel with someone. And then a friend of mine and I paid his meal. It was paid. He went up to the register and paid it a second time. And he came to our table and he's like, I'm not letting anyone buy me something. And I said, and I'm
going to show you.
Yeah. And I looked at him and said, this is why you're going to hell, because you won't accept a free gift. You won't even accept it from God. And so he paid it again. He paid it himself, even though it was already covered. Bad example, but it kind of works for me. So I believe I can say to an unbeliever, Christ died for you. Now, that is where some people would say I'm not a Calvinist because they think that that's not a proper view of limited atonement. But I would argue that it was a common understanding of limited atonement even during the Puritan times before John Owen's book, Death of Death. And there's two books that I have that I'm working my way through that seem to indicate that both independently, because I don't see them quoting each other so far at least, but referencing that John Owen's book, Death of Death, seems to be the turning point on the definition of limited atonement. So you guys can correct me where you think I'm wrong.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, well, of the three of us, I'm probably the least qualified to speak on this issue, but here's what I understand, is that Christ's death would be sufficient for the whole world. The issue is, as you say, who is it applied to? When he's writing My Little Children, I think the first thing is that who's the little children? It's the audience to whom he's writing. And so when you're saying my little children, not us, but also to the whole world, you have a specific audience that's reading this. And then there's those who would be saved outside of that audience in that time and place. So I think it's pretty easy to say that, as you pointed out, does whole world mean whole world like every single person? Well, in which case, if you believe that, you believe in universalism. Or is it all throughout the whole world, all those who believe? And I think consistently, especially when we look at, John, this is the same Apostle John who wrote in John 3:16 that, whosoever shall believe, that's the one that God saves. So how do we get to that? It's because God in his word has said that he draws to himself those who will believe in Christ. He has predestined them from eternity past. They will be, justified, sanctified, glorified. So that application of salvation is to all those who would believe, whom God predestined in eternity past. Nothing happens outside of God's decree. Why? Because if it happened outside of God's decree, God is not God. So therefore, everything that happens, good, bad, middle of the road, whatever, the day you had today was according to God's sovereign will. So if all things are according to his decree, then those who are saved are according to his decree. Therefore, when you, Andrew, or Drew, or anybody else goes out and preaches the gospel, anyone who responds in repentance and faith has done so as part of God's predetermined plan of salvation. So could it save everyone? Yes. Will it save everyone? No, because it only saves those who respond in repentance and faith, and those who respond in repentance and faith throughout the whole world are those who God has predestined to salvation. So I get where you're coming from. Ultimately, I have to settle on the fact that the audience to whom he is writing, that's my little children. And that will be throughout history. I understand that. But he has a specific people in mind. And then he says, but not only us, so not only myself, not only you who hear this, but through the sins of the whole world.
So you're saying the not us, so the us are the specific people he's writing to, and the not
Right.
us are believers in the future.
Or throughout the world who, because if he's writing, let's just say this was like Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Paul had a specific audience. So if he were to say something to that effect, he's referring to himself and that audience. So to whomever John had written this epistle, that immediate audience is the us, him and those who are in that audience. Then outside of that is throughout the whole world, because not everybody at that time is going to be reading Paul's letter, but you're going to have believers throughout the known world at that time as the gospel continues to go forth.
And for the sake, we may not get to all the questions tonight, but I'll say this, I haven't heard that argument before. I mean, when I hear the Jewish Gentile distinction, to me, it sounded like someone that's trying to fit something into their conclusion. Like they have a conclusion.
I would agree.
And they're trying to fit it in. But the way that you explained, I think that could be a plausible interpretation from within the context. I'd have to read through the rest of 1 John with that in mind and see whether that would be consistent. Never heard it before, so I haven't thought it through.
Well, like I said, I'm probably the least qualified to speak on it.
No, but it doesn't matter who's. Look, all of us have the Holy Spirit, so all of us are equally qualified to speak to it, and we all have to listen to one another and say, okay, hey, I'm saying, I have to think through. I hadn't heard that, never thought of it that way. Let me reread all of 1 John with that in mind and say, maybe my view is going to change. Right. And that's how we should handle these things.
Yeah, so. I agree.
Right. Yeah, Chris, that's your interpretation of that is how I've always taken that and looked at that. Andrew, the way you opened your explanation is one that I would agree with. Everyone limits the atonement to some extent. They either limit it in its extent, so who it covers, or they limit it by its efficacy, right? Does it work? And so as long as there are people in hell, the atonement is limited. But I've always thought that limited atonement probably isn't the correct term. It is more better defined as definite atonement or indefinite atonement. So does Christ actually save? And, I have to say, yes, he does. Now, when we talk about the limitation of that, well, we also have to consider Romans 9, right? The potter, because the potter makes vessels of clay for mercy and vessels for wrath. But I would agree with Andrew. We can go to people and say, God died for you. Why? Because we don't know who the elect are. Mm-hmm. And so every time we go out to preach the gospel or evangelize people, or we're preaching at a conference or in a church, particular redemption, that's a good term too. Whenever we go out to proclaim the gospel, we can have assurance by the power of the Holy Spirit that someone somewhere is going to be affected by it.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the thing, you got to remember, the Tulip was a response to the Arminians. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so their view was that someone could, the thing that really saved them was their choice.
Right.
And so it became the question of, the atonement is limited in that sense. It's not your choosing, but Christ.
Right.
So that becomes the issue.
Which is really interesting with the remonstrance itself, because those pastors that brought that objection, they were excommunicated from the church as heretics, because naturally when you take that position, it's not just about choice, it leads to universalism, and that's why they were
Well,
excommunicated.
Actually, it leads to what we now have, open theism. That's more consistent.
Right. Yeah.
So
Well, and the other thing to remember is that when you're talking about TULIP, that 5 points was response to the 5 points
Right.
that they had presented. So when you get,
Correct.
I'm not as good on the history as some of the others, but I understand this part is that they had introduced the 5 points saying this is what, how salvation works and stuff. And then when it brought together, they responded through those with those 5 points. And that's where we get to it. But that's not the totality of what the Calvinist belief system about soteriology is. It's simply the response to those points.
Right.
And so there's so much more when people start going, oh, you're limiting God. It's like, no, you need to understand the entirety of it.
And so we have to look at what they're responding to see what was the meaning of limited atonement. And I'm just going to, Chris, he says, we're not limiting God. Like someone said, oh, you're putting God in a box. I go, really? Can God tell a lie? Well, no, not according to Titus 1:2. So did God put God in a box? He can't do anything outside his nature. But Pastor Darren said this: I think that the Puritan view is the proper view. It's in an alignment with what Calvin also taught. And he said, I think the earliest explanation of limited atonement from my perspective. So and that's the thing is, well, see, the thing is the Puritan view, but which Puritans? John Owens or before John Owens or after, right? So I've kind of used the term historical Calvinist in the past, but I guess in these books I'm reading, they're using the term classical Calvinist. And so those would be the people that would hold to the view that I hold to. But I think what we end up seeing is we all agree that when we look at this, there's clearly a point where we say, okay, not everyone is saved. There's people in hell. And even though I could say this, it's sufficient for all, I'm going to say it's effective for few. So
a good book you can get about just Calvinism in general is A History of the Theology of Calvinism. I forgot the author's name, but that's what it is, A History of the Theology.
Chris is looking it up now because we know how Chris is.
And the thing is it looks intimidating, but it's a really easy read. And once you start, before you even realize it, you're halfway done with the book.
Okay. And while Chris is looking it up, John says, Drew, I subscribed to your channel. God bless your ministry. And he asked earlier, he said, Drew, question, why are your comments turned off on your videos on YouTube?
I had no clue they were turned off. So I guess I'll be looking into that.
So Darren says the pre-Owen view. I agree with you. The pre-Owen view.
The response in response to what that book, The History and Theology of Calvinism by Kurt Daniel.
Yeah.
And you can find it right now on Amazon for $20. Normally $50, but it's $20 and $3.99 delivery.
So now this is kind of, I see this comment that came up and I started and then read it. So, but it's a tad bit humbling. But John says this: the more I listen to Striving for Eternity, the more I discover how little I know. Very interesting topics. John, you don't know how touching that is. I don't know that it's deserved, but
that's okay. So, sometimes I get on here, and when there's some guests, I realize how little I know.
I'm literally the kid in the corner eating paste when these things happen. So,
but we do have some things to get through real quick. So Melissa posted this earlier. Andrew, you need to make an AI voice of Chris as Captain America for us.
Where he says church assemble.
Now,
I'm going to start blocking some of you people.
I can do an AI that can make a picture of Chris as Captain America. The question is, can I get an AI to animate Chris as Captain America saying church assemble?
This is why I don't come on here very much. You all are not helping this situation.
KT says this, Chris, you should at least pray about working with Andrew.
I have.
Get counsel.
I have.
Yeah. So the part about that Chris is really thinking about is the working with Andrew.
No, okay.
He doesn't have to.
Let me
I'll
clarify.
just give him the keys to the fiefdom and
Let me just clarify this. Okay, last year really changed my perspective. Okay, when I looked at retirement, which is now 246 days away, I thought I'm going to do stuff like Andrew does. I'm going to do stuff like Daryl and Virgil. I'm going to do ministry stuff, and then
you are.
My previous knuckleheaded governor, praise God, he's no longer in office, had come up with this grand idea to make sure state employees got the COVID jab, which was, oh, by the way, if you don't get the jab, we're going to hit you with a massive COVID or a surcharge on your insurance. Now, they could only give it this much for me, but they could tag me massively for every unjabbed family member. And that's what they were going to do. And it was going to double my insurance. So I was looking at retirement early, which forced me for the first time at that time in 23 years to sit down and look at what my costs would look like. And I realized what I wasn't going to be bringing in. I was going to make a fair amount of money, but I was going to have to work so I could continue to provide for my family. That changed my entire perspective. Now I realize that's not what God's calling me to. God has called me, given me this tiny little platform called Voice of Reason Radio. I get to write a blog once in a while. I do a podcast once a week. And that's all I really need to do. God has given me this much. That's it, this much. And that's where I need to be faithful. No. This is what I know. This is what I know.
I believe you have scripture. You have scripture for that.
I have prayed about this. I've given consideration to this. I've even been in conversation with my pastors about it. I know.
I got a book for you. It's called God Doesn't Whisper. That
I have that. I need to read it, but I haven't.
The feeling is not. So let's see. Pastor Darren Steed says Edwards has some pretty good stuff on his exclamation limited atonement, which, if memory serves me, is in line with what you said here, Andrew. And so, but Darren also said this. Chris, just be thankful that they are wanting an AI of Captain America and not
Aaron. Boy, if I see you and I are going to have a conversation.
I hold on. I know who Andrew's call is going to be either tonight or tomorrow, and it's going to be to James White to get on board with this.
Chris has stared off his camera and his mic. He's obviously either laughing too hard, joking to death. Oh, that's good.
I'm ready to leave. I'm going to go away. You guys are driving me crazy over here. Oh, my word. This is the worst part is I will never live this stuff down thanks to you.
Look, I would blame yourself for that. And so we want to explain this. So you never saw the movie Elf or Buddy the Elf, whatever the name of it is.
Tells never to watch it.
And
actively tells not to watch
you
it.
And James White gave you some abuse over that. Yeah. But what was it? He sent you an elf doll?
Yes. Thanks to my buddy Rich.
You said that James White outdid me. And then it was like throwing down a gauntlet. And obviously, I am going to not be outdone by James White. So I made sure not just to send you 2 full-size Buddy the Elf dolls, which you used as target practice, which was cool. But I employed others to help out, and you were getting daily Buddy the Elf stuff. So I
got scared to go to the mailbox
until you conceded that I was not outdone by James White. Now, if I have to really prove it, I mean, an AI version of you as Buddy the Elf singing a song for that. Now that I would like to see James beat that one if I do that.
But it would be really good. AI.
Why are you guys encouraging this?
I don't know if I will do it for this reason. I love my brother Chris, and I know it frustrates him, so I probably won't do it.
I just want as my ringtone Chris Honholt as Buddy the Elf going, Buddy the Elf, what's your favorite color?
I actually watched that movie while running on the treadmill one day just for Chris, just so that post that I had seen it. And look, and James Cave is saying Buddy the Elf is sleeping on my pillow. Because he probably went to mypillow.com and used promo code SFE to get his discount on his pillow. Just saying, you should do that too. All right. What one question we'll finish up with this. One last question that we had there. Jason Cave said, do we have to obey the fourth commandment today? And which day is it? Now, this is an interesting question. Let me give my view quick, and then I'll let these guys answer. That way they get to, again, this is a strange thing. Most hosts would say, like, they'll let everyone else say first so that they could correct things. I would rather have you guys correct me. I do things backwards, obviously. But the view that I have is that on the seventh day of creation, God created a Sabbath day. And because it was tied to creation, there is a Sabbath that is universal for all mankind. And that is why when you have in like the USSR, they tried to go to a 10-day work week. It didn't work. And so what you ended up having was a case of, them going back to a 7-day work week, because that is God's design. Now, I believe when Moses comes along, it gives the law, you have more specific commands for the nation of Israel for the Sabbath day, which at this point was on the seventh day. And this was something that was done specific for the nation of Israel. Now, I, as a dispensationalist, are going to see a distinction between Israel and the church. If someone says that there isn't that distinction, they're going to need to explain why they don't keep the Passover, because that's a command to keep forever, according to, God for Israel. So if you're Israel, better be keeping that. So, but the issue I would have is that we are not the nation of Israel. We're not under the laws for the nation of Israel. And therefore, we would be under the universal law of a Sabbath, but we can celebrate it on the first day of the week because we are celebrating the resurrection of Christ. But still having a day set aside where we don't work, a day of rest for the worship of God. Now, doesn't mean we can't, go to Starbucks. Well, no, you shouldn't go there anyway. But if you go to Dunkin' Donuts instead. But no, I mean, like, I don't think it means we can't. There's people who take it very literally. You can't go out to eat. You can't do things like that. I'm really liking Pastor Darren. He agrees more and more with me. He says, yes, the Sabbath is part of the created order. Yes. And so I don't think we have to be under the law where we can't do these certain things because it's a Sabbath. I think that we're not to work. We're under that universal one. So that's my view. I don't know what you guys say.
Go ahead.
I went first last time, so your turn.
Okay. Good point. Yeah. So the idea of the Sabbath, I mean, that's honestly not an area I've dabbled in and looked into. So I'm not going to speak a whole lot about it. But from my understanding is that because of the resurrection, Christ rising, the Sabbath has now moved to Sunday, and we gather on Sunday to worship. John says when he's writing, he says, I was in the spirit on the Kuriake Hemera, the Lord's Day. And so we use it's now the first day of the month that we gather. And, I would agree with Andrew, it's to be a day of rest. So a day of worship for the Lord and a day of rest for us, which is a blessing to us. And it's one of my things that working, I will not work my job on a Sunday. I just won't. The last time I worked on a Sunday, I think I was working at Public Supermarket and I was in high school. And I said, I was convicted about it. I said, I'm not going to work on the Lord's Day. That's a day I'm setting aside for the Lord and for rest.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm, again, probably least qualified to speak on it, but two things that I think about when I hear people bring this up. And the first is that in Hebrews chapter, where am I at? Chapter 4, the writer specifically speaks to the Sabbath, the day of God's rest. And the day, and he says, since therefore it remains for some to enter it, those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. Again, he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David, so long afterward, in the words already quoted, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Therefore, let us strive to enter that rest so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. All of this pointing to Christ, that our rest from the works is in Christ. So ultimately, the Sabbath pointing to Christ. Now, I don't have an issue with the idea of the Lord's Day and that being a day of worship. But I look at that and I go, that's Scripture's pointing us to something very specific in Christ, that Christ is our Sabbath rest. And then I think of also Paul writing to the Romans in 14, where he says, 14 verse 5, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains from the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives to himself, and none dies to himself. For if we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For this end, Christ died and lived again, that he might be both Lord of the dead and the living. And he's using this and saying, why are you casting judgment on what you eat or on what day you esteem? Those are things that you do in your own conviction, And so if a Christian says Sunday is the Lord's day, that is the day that is most important, I'm not going to give them any heat over that, any more than I should give any heat to someone who says every day is the Lord's day, and every day I worship God, whether I'm with the saints collectively in prayer, in edification, in worship, in study, or whether I'm working or I'm with my family, in all ways, because all things are our worship. It's not just music. It's not just being present for the reading. Everything we are to do is in worship, is a act of worship to God. So if I do it in all days, and I esteem all days equal, then either way, I'm doing what I can to glorify the Lord. So for myself, I look at it and go, the Sabbath is Christ. He is our rest. And I agree, the Lord's Day really is, for the Christian, is a very extremely important day that we come together to worship collectively. And then all days throughout the week should be an act of worship to God.
Sure. Yeah. And speaking about worship, we can look at the first table of the law, 1 through 4, as how we should worship. So the first commandment is our object of worship. The second commandment is the manner in which we worship. The third commandment is the heart of our worship. And then the fourth commandment is the time of our worship, in that rest. And we can actually sum all of that up, like you just said, Chris, in Christ, pointing to Christ.
That's an interesting way of viewing it, Drew. I think it was KT or maybe Melissa, I forget who, but someone referred to Colossians 2:16, which says, therefore, no one is to act as your judge in regards to food or drink in respect to festival or new moons or a Sabbath day. So we shouldn't be judging one another based on those things. I was going to end, but then I see someone that comes in, and we should bring him in. But
oh no!
I meant to start the show, Drew. I meant to have you ask me why I'm wearing this shirt.
Oh, why are you wearing that shirt?
Thank you. I'm glad you asked. No. So today I was at a summit for basically it was dealing with the issues in cybersecurity, a bunch of people that catch bad guys for a living using computers, right? So dealing with different techniques and things. So what do you do when you're, around a bunch of techies who most of which probably don't follow after God? You wear a shirt from the Biblical Science Institute Jason Lyle, which got me a bunch of looks as I was walking around, and people were like, what biblical science? Because they think those are mutually exclusive. So great opportunity to share. So Jason Cave is backstage. We're going to end, but he's a regular here. He supports us on YouTube. For the person who wanted to know why we monetize on YouTube, he donates to us through YouTube. So Jason, welcome. I was going to end, but you came in, so you have a question.
And he's wearing a UGA shirt.
Go Dogs. Yes, sir. Yes.
The boys got to stick together.
Amen. Yes, sir. Now, I wanted to just jump in real quick. Thank you guys for your time and answering the question. Just to get some more clarification, I've got a guy that works with me. He grew up Seventh-day Adventist, and we've been listening to this JMAC series that he's done lately on the Sabbath, and he keeps holding to the position that that the new covenant doesn't replace the old covenant, and that he believes that all of the 10 commandments are still valid, and that includes obeying the Sabbath on the sixth day, or excuse me, the seventh day being Saturday.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to figure out how to, get him to understand about Jesus. His resurrection day was Sunday. He led by the example, for that day, and then 7 days later.
Well, you may have bigger questions that you first have to find out. Okay, you need to find out how much he follows Ellen G. White, because some Seventh-day Adventists are cultists. They're in a cult, and some are not. Some just prefer to worship on the seventh day, and you could have legitimate believers. But if he is one who's following Ellen G. White and things she said, it becomes a problem. Like one of the things, Ellen G. White, even though, and this is kind of an interesting irony, even though atheists try to say that we get the term creationist or creationism from Seventh-day Adventists, Ellen G. White believed in evolution, because she said the reason we needed to be vegetarians is because eating meat brings in the animal instincts of men, and that's why they rape women. We're not animals, so it's totally different. So if he's following after Ellen G. White, you have a whole different route that you're going to go than just, the Sabbath. But the reality is, the question either way to ask is, does keeping the Sabbath save you? In other words, if you don't keep the Sabbath on the seventh day, will you go to hell? And if he says yes, now you got a totally different issue. Now you can go to Galatians and just deal with the fact that he is under the law, and he thinks the law is going to save him rather than Christ. So don't worry about arguing how to argue over the Sabbath. Go to Galatians and argue over the fact that the law can't save you. And just say, hey, let's do a Bible study through Galatians.
Okay.
Right?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask the exact same thing, because if he believes the 10 commandments are all the things that we need to follow, does he believe all the Levitical law? Does he believe that you have to be circumcised? Does he believe that you have to obey all the various things that the Jews were called to? Because if he doesn't, then even he doesn't believe that. He's taking, well, I like the 10 commandments because it has the thing about the Sabbath, and that's the part we're supposed to remember. And he's been told, if you're not doing the Sabbath, if you're not doing Saturday, you've sinned. Well, if he's going to say that, then like Paul, if you're going to break one aspect of the law, you're going to break all the law. So you better be under the whole Levitical law, and you need to obey all of it completely. Otherwise, you have no hope. And so I exactly what Andrew said. Take him through Galatians and take him through the law and let him see what the law really says.
Okay.
Ditto.
Awesome. Thank you guys. You guys are awesome. Great show.
Thank you. Thank you. And Michael says, I don't care what day of the week church meets. I'll come.
Yes.
So there you go. And we get an apology to you there, Chris. Melissa says, Chris, my apologies for my earlier comment. I didn't mean to embarrass you, brother. You are such a good sport, and it was all in good fun. Melissa, I would not have brought it up if it wasn't for the fact I knew he could handle it. And,
and he would have brought it up anyway.
No, he wouldn't.
I
He
was
would
trying.
he would just
I
he would see the
cleared all
comments
my
start
stuff
laughing.
here, so I took off all my stuff that nobody would give me any grief today. And
No, you didn't, sir. No, you didn't. So you're going to see, since you brought it up, I'm just going to say, now I'm going to get myself in trouble, and people are going to watch what they have in the background. So I have a tendency to like to look at different things when people are on camera, in pictures. I like to look at.
This is why I have this as my background.
Yeah. So
I have a
if
small
you,
house.
Chris, if you were to look over your left shoulder all the way over, it looks like Batman is right there pointing at you.
My wife's out in the living room watching this, and she'll back me up. That's hers.
Sure, it is.
It is. Batman's not mine.
You bought it for her, I'm sure. Here you go, dear. It goes this way. Hey, no, we appreciate it. And look, guys, I appreciate you guys coming in. Appreciate the questions tonight. I should mention that coming up soon, we're going to be doing a episode. It'll be on June 15th, which I think is two weeks away. We'll be discussing the Essential Church, a documentary coming out pretty soon. So I want you guys to check that out. And we're just going to close out with our message that we are going to start using to end with. So until next week, remember to strive to make today an eternal day for the glory of God.
All other religious systems are based on a system of morality of good works. What makes Christianity unique, it is not a system of morality. It is about Jesus Christ. Buddha is dead, Muhammad is dead, Joseph Smith is dead, Mary Baker Eddy is dead, but Jesus Christ rose from the dead. If Jesus Christ was not both fully man and fully God, there would be no payment of sin. This was a debate in the first century. Jesus Christ was fully man. It's important to note that he did not have a human father, therefore he did not inherit a sin nature. Jesus Christ not only had to be fully man, but he also had to be without sin, never breaking any part of God's law. If Jesus was not a man, then people would have no payment of sins. But Jesus Christ is also fully God. Jesus had to be God in order to pay an eternal fine. Only an eternal being can pay an eternal fine.
Ha ha.